The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Maybe we should just read indeed. Good morning, everybody. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews, and we are back for our next episode of Fabian Freeway, the book we've been reading for the last few weeks now. I think this is week 3. Yeah, this will be week 3 because we're in session number 9, and it's 3 sessions a week. So I'm doing this Sunday morning session because I couldn't do last night. I went to my cousin's 21st birthday party, spent the evening with family, eating delicious food, having lots of fun. There were a lot of speeches, which is unusual for our family and our culture, I think. My wife's Vietnamese, and in the Vietnamese culture, speeches are a real mainstay of any social gathering. Everyone likes to get up and kind of have a speech competition, and that sort of started happening last night as well. So we had lots of loving, heartwarming, heartfelt speeches about how much we love our youngest cousin, and he is the youngest, and he's just turned 21, and so that makes me feel like I'm not as young as I used to be. Let's put it that way. So welcome back to those of you who are tuning in live. I hope you're having a lovely day, and if you're in a place that's sunny, I hope you get to enjoy the sun at some point today. Maybe you're enjoying the sun right now, listening on headphones or watching in a garden or a park or somewhere beautiful. It's lovely and warm and sunny here in the northwest of the UK, and I'm definitely going to be getting out there to soak some of that up after the broadcast. But as I said, we couldn't do Saturday night's broadcast, and I didn't want to leave people hanging without the third installment of the week. And it's a commitment that I made. I want to do these 3 sessions every week until we get to the end of the book. And so I thought I would sneak one in today, and we could crack on. So it's been, so that's it. That's what we're doing. That's why we're here. So I'm glad that people have tuned in live, even though it's not the usual broadcast time. And I hope you're all doing well. We've got LJ, we've got Join the Internet, and we've got Adam in the chat on YouTube. So good day to you all. Lovely to have you here. And I don't think we've got anybody hanging around in the other chats, so I'm not even going to mention them. It's all kicking off on YouTube. This is where it's at. Gwen's here too. Good morning. So lovely jubbly indeed to have you all here. So Fabian Freeway, that is the book we're reading through. We're making good progress. We're over half. We hit the halfway mark in the last video. And the last video, I think, was a bit harder because what's happening is there's so many names, there's so many different organizations, and these organizations change their name and rebrand themselves, and so it's quite a tricky sort of narrative and thread to follow. It's not really a narrative, it's more a sort of history of the people who hold socialist ideals and therefore communist sympathies, and wanted to bring them to the Western world, which typically and traditionally valued the individual, valued some sort of free market capitalism. I shouldn't say traditionally. I mean, we had royalty and royal families going back even further. But I think the socialism and the communism kind of was established in tension with those things I just mentioned, with the individualism, with values based on a free market, with a sort of decentralization of control. And socialism, which we know is a gateway drug to communism, was kind of established in order to push more centralization of control and power and authority in the hands of a small group, but a kind of a small but a growing bureaucracy. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing played out in the book. We've had the origins of the Fabian Society back in England in 1884. And just as a side note and a curious thing to bear in mind is there's an idea that George Orwell wrote his book 1984 based on 100 years after the Fabian Society first met and what the world would look like if the Fabians had their way. So that is a really interesting lens to look at the 1984 world and the narrative there, right? And what did he say? A boot stomping on the human face for the rest of eternity was the future if we didn't do something. So that's a nice, curious aside that I think is worth bearing in mind. We got Immune to PR has just showed up. Hello to you. And so we had the foundation of the group. They all met. They got together in Edward Pease's home, and they were sitting around, and a lot of them were just... The irony is a lot of them were living off capitalist accrued wealth. And they had inheritances and they had incomes that were based on capitalism, that were based on providing a product or a service and doing business and building that up and establishing wealth that could, investing the capital in order to have ongoing wealth. And so it's strange that a lot of them came from a background where they benefited from that system, and then they decided to, we're going to chip away at that system. We're going to have long-term plans, gradualist plans to undermine and transform that system. Now, of course, they didn't want to undermine and transform it for everybody. No. They wanted to keep it for themselves, but they want everybody else to be in a socialism, communism type system. So I think one of the things that people often forget is when these different isms, these different systems are vying and competing and we're analyzing them and talking about them, what's actually happening is some people live under one system and some people live under another system. And I think a lot of the isms, the communism, the socialism, that is for the plebs and the proletariat and the working class and the people who are lower down in the pyramid, who get taxed, who get farmed for their money and their effort and their labor and maybe their energies, depending on if you want to go into that sort of metaphysical territory of loosh and demonic harvesting of trauma. But that's an aside for the purposes of this discussion. In this discussion, what we're seeing is they are looking at ways that they can continue to sit on their laurels and manage the rest of us. And they see themselves as kind of the shepherds of the human herd. And that's a deliberate analogy because they were seeing humans as a kind of livestock. I think that's the best way to get into their mindset, is that they're looking around and like, oh my gosh, we've got a lot of these pesky humans here, and how we're gonna manage them and keep them under control and make sure we can continue getting our benefits and scooping the cream off the top of their labor and their productivity. Now, whichever way you look at it, that is the reality of the world that we live in. You're born into a place on the planet, and that place is you are not given an option, and then you are farmed for your taxation. A certain slice of your labor, of your wealth, of the money you earn is taken off you under threat of violence, under threat of coercion, under threat of imprisonment, and then taken away from you to have what done with it, to fund wars, to get taken out of the country and put in offshore tax havens, to be lining the pockets and giving the good life to that small parasitic class of people who do nothing, add no value, and consider themselves above and beyond and better than the rest of us. They consider themselves as kind of a higher breed, more valuable blood. They are, because of their situation, which they haven't earned or inherited. Well, they've often inherited, but they haven't earned themselves. But because they find themselves sitting on these vast fortunes and sitting around in these big houses, they say, well, we must be here because we're better. And therefore, we must continue this situation. If we're better, then we have to make sure that we continue to reap the benefits, and we deserve it, and we earned it, and everybody else needs to sort of be managed and controlled to make sure that they don't challenge the situation we are in. And that's social Darwinism. That's all based on Charles Darwin's work on the origin of species, subtitled The Preservation of the Favored Races. And out of this supposedly amazing piece of scientific work, which has all sorts of problems with it, but out of this came ideas such as eugenics or dysgenics, because eugenics is the uplifting, the improvement of the genetics. Dysgenics is the opposite of that, right? And I think when people talk about eugenics, it'd be more accurate to say there's eugenics going on for a certain group and there's dysgenics going on for everybody else. Because there's a certain group of people, they don't go to the same doctors that we go to. They don't go to the same public, like government-run schools that we go to. They don't get the same supermarket food loaded with additives and preservatives and chemicals and sprayed with pesticides that we get, right? Famously, the king formerly known as Prince Charles has a whole host of people who travel with him and carry with him this organic food that they prepare every single day to make sure he's getting the highest and the best quality of food. Another anecdote that I heard, I don't know if it's true, but I heard that Rockefeller never used any allopathic medicine, which, as we know from the Raymond Fosdick Rockefeller book that we read, he funded and spread throughout the world and undermined local native systems and modalities of healing and health preservation, particularly in China. The Chinese system of healing was massively attacked by Rockefeller and his funding of colleges and universities and academics, bringing them over to the West, training them up, sending them back, and giving them a lavish lifestyle, making them seem like they were more important and into something that was better and more modern and advanced than the traditional and the older ways of doing things. Yet the Rockefellers themselves don't use any of that stuff, right? They're going to more likely to be homeopathic healers, for example, or naturopathic healers, all these other modalities that are written off and sidelined and slandered really as pseudoscience. Okay, so it's a whole web of confusion. But I think the thing to bear in mind, like I said, with the communism, socialism, capitalism thing, there's rules for thee and not for me going on. That's the long and short of it. That's the gist, as Richard Grove would say. So I think that's kind of what we're learning here, is when they're sitting around and they're talking about these isms and they're spreading socialism through universities, through working unions, they're undermining the liberals. So in the UK, so what I'm kind of learning, and I'm not an expert, all right, but what I'm learning is that the UK had a liberal party. Now, liberal, the word liberal originally comes from the same word, it's the same root as liberty, which is the same root as library, which is liber, which is to read. So the word to read spawned the word for a big building full of books, and also spawned the word for freedom, liberty. And then there was the Liberal Party. And back in the day, the Liberal Party would have been working, I don't know the details, or I shouldn't say what they were working on, I don't know, but they existed and they were called liberal. So at least nominally, on the face of it, in name, they were in support of freedom and liberty, okay? So in England, we had the Liberals, but the Liberals were kind of broken down, taken over, infested, penetrated, permeated by the Fabian society. And they got in there, and they also got in working trade unions, and they changed things from within. And eventually they broke down the Liberal Party and they established the British Labour Party. And then to this day, the British Labour Party and the Conservative Party, they're the only two parties that ever get in. Same in America, you got the Democrats and the Republicans, and they're the only two parties you can vote for. So, yay freedom. You've got a choice between the kitten punchers and the puppy kickers. Doesn't that make you feel good and grateful to be living in a liberal democracy? So they got together, they transformed politics and the political parties. And I think it seems to me that their goal, their long-term goal, was to just establish themselves as the controlling managerial bureaucracy of eventually a worldwide technocratic, socialist, scientific, communist system. Because all those words amount to the same thing. They just apply to sort of different stages or different parts of that machine. But they all mean centralized control by scientific elites with white lab coats and clipboards, dictating to you and everyone else how much of what you get, and they take from you and they dole it out and dish it out according to whatever they think is going to best keep you stuck in that situation of exploitation. But they won't say that. They'll say it's because of fairness, and it's because of justice, and it's because of equality, and it's because some people have more and some people have less. Therefore, we need to come along, and it is our job, our self-appointed role, to decide who has too much and who has too little. And, that's a very important job with a lot of responsibility. So we're going to have to give ourselves nice bonuses and nice salaries and nice benefits and travel and holidays and trips to attend conferences and to go over the world on research and fact-finding missions and all this kind of stuff, right? because their role is so important. But it all amounts to that same thing. It all amounts to this kind of, how can we maneuver ourselves into a position where we're the ones dictating to everybody else what they have to do and how they live and what they have access to. So this book's very good because it's telling us how that was rolled out in America. And America, of course, was a country founded on, fuck you, England, I'm not going to pay your tax. We're going over here to do our own thing. And had some very novel ideas established in the Constitution, the importance of the individual, the minimization of government, the roles that they had, the checks and balances that were required to stop this bureaucratic elite from gaining too much power and becoming all-encompassing and a big bureaucratic blob / cancerous tumor on the rest of us. So it was founded with very novel ideas which hadn't really been tested or tried in many places historically, or at least we're told they hadn't. Depending on how reliable you find the history in the history books. But no wonder then that when this was happening and generating a lot of freedom, people were working on the land, people were leaving their countries to go to America, rolling that die. Can you imagine, as Nigel Watson says, pressing the gamble button to get up and leave everything that's familiar and go to another place and just, right, I'm going to go over there and make it. Because the conditions they were living under were so intolerable, and they had a shot over there of making a life, making some money, making something happen, of taking your destiny into your own hands and going for that dangerous freedom instead of that comfortable, safe slavery. And that's the tension here, isn't it? And so for a country that had been founded on this, like, okay, let's go after the dangerous freedom, it's no surprise then that these people, these boys, these Fabian socialists, these wolves in sheep's clothing, these long-term gradualist tortoises plodding along had to put so much effort and time and planning into getting over there and destabilizing things from within. And that's kind of where we've got up to so far, is the establishment of things like the ISS, which was the Intercollegiate Socialist Society. And then the last couple of chapters were all about the Rand School of, let me find out the name here. The Rand School of Social Science was formed in 1906 till 1935. So it's funding the academics. They've got authors on board, H.G. Wells. They've got playwrights, George Bernard Shaw. They're getting into political parties. They're getting into trade unions. They're getting into universities. They're really spinning up a narrative, and they're trying to get the people who want to see justice and want to see good outcomes for the most amount of people. They're harnessing that good intention and goodwill and the aspirations to see what is good and true and just and right in the world. They're finding that, and they're weaponizing it, and they're using it to build a system which is the exact opposite of that. So it's very sinister, and it's very satanic. It's a bit of an inversion going on, but it's been quite a wild ride so far. And so today we are back with another 2 chapters. And so the 2 chapters we're going to be going into today, we've got Chapter 16, By Any Other Name, and Chapter 17, Fabian Face Cards in the New Deal. So how about that? I'm going to have a sip. And that's it really for the intro today. That was just an ad-libbed, made up, unplanned ramble. So I hope there was some useful points to recap in there. And I hope it made sense. It's good practice for me to try and express these plots and these ideas after we've read them, because that's what it's all about, isn't it? Like taking in a big amount of information and then condensing it and being able to fire it out at people in a way that holds their attention, and you can give them the key parts, because this book is so full of names and dates and institutes, and it's a lot of info, and we can't remember all of it. So we need to extract the broad strokes of what's going on and communicate that to people. So that's me practicing that. So let's have a quick review of the chat, and then we will get into the reading. And apologies if my lighting is a bit funny today. It's because it's daytime, and I usually do this in the dark. But all right. So let's have a little look back. LJ says, it sounds like they were all just bloody bored and thought, hey, let's set up a society and do things our way. Well, that was actually... Rose Martin did say that in the beginning, that they were bored. They had flirted with a few of the things, such as theosophy, such as vegetarianism, and those things didn't stick. And they were middle class, and they were sitting around, and they were, I think, uninspired with their roles in life. They'd abandoned religion, so they weren't looking to serve God, or they weren't trying to get in touch with their soul's purpose or their conscience in order to find out what to do. So I think they were very much bored and atheist, and from fairly well-to-do backgrounds, and they didn't want to do any real actual work, something physical, tangible, something that you could see the results of. So I think they were sitting around going like, how can we just continue to sit back and profit off the labor of other people? Gwen says, Beatrice Webb spent her whole life attacking the very prosperity that her father had built up, that had brought to that point. And that's her niece saying that. Kitty Muggeridge said that about Beatrice Webb. Yeah. And we also read and found out that Sidney Webb, Edward Pease, and is it Bernard Shaw? One of them. At least 3 of them were just living off money that they'd either inherited or their wives had inherited. So, and that was all done through, building businesses and providing services, and probably some inheritance money in there as well. If you're the right blood, then you get a bit of money left to you in the wills, don't you? Gwen also says some don't go to any doctors now. Yeah, I would think that's probably wise in this day and age. LJ says, I love words and where they come from, always learning. Good, that's the way to be. We've had a couple of new words reading this one, haven't we? So one of them was perfervid, which I still have to check up how it's spelt. So let's do that right now. Perfervid. Right, there you go. Perfervid. And that means very fervent, extremely ardent. Perfervid. So that was the new word. And I can't remember what the other one was. Something. Yeah, that's gone. That one is absolutely gone. So if anyone can remember that other new word. Jeanette's here. Hi. All right. Let's get into the book. Let's get these chapters polished, and then we can go back to enjoying the sunshine and having a lovely Sunday. Chapter 16. By any other... Oh, hang on. Let me move the mic. Okay. Chapter 16. By any other name. 1. Despite some disillusioning experiences, the socialist-inspired American Civil Liberties Union has never to this day ceased its efforts in defense of the catastrophic left. Such consistent activity in behalf of the militants and expendables of the revolutionary movement has naturally exposed the ACLU to what its friends term, quote, misinterpretation. So that misinterpretation will be some of the other quotes that we heard, which were like in reference to, I think, the ISS and maybe to the Rand School of Social Sciences, people saying, we're not here to produce socialists. We're just here to educate people about socialism. And the argument was kind of like, well, how can you defend against it? Or how can you make an intelligent defense against it or an intelligent argument in favor of it unless you first understand it and learn about it and study it? But we're not actually churning out socialists. And that was kind of the line they were taking when they were being accused of producing socialists, which at this time everyone was aware led to communism. And if you remember as well, there was a section about universities, and they were trying to set up these chapters of socialist student groups in the universities, and they kept getting prevented from doing that by conservative deans, I guess you call them. I think the dean of the university, the top dog in the universities, and these conservative people would be like, no, put the kibosh on that. We're not having these socialist groups getting together, because they all knew that it led to communism, and communism had just led to the starvation of 10 million Russians, the failure of the Russian Revolution. But that didn't stop the Fabian Society and the Fabian Socialists from continuing to advocate these systems and the centralization, top-down, technocratic control of the labor and the production and the goods, right? So I think that's what it's getting at with this misinterpretations here in inverted commas. During the 1920s, it was occasionally described by opponents as a legal branch of the Communist Party. In 1940, it finally barred, quote, totalitarians from membership, a decision resulting in the protest resignation of Dr. Harry F. Ward, its original chairman. So Harry Ward's like, nope, either we admit membership to the totalitarians, or I'm leaving. At a later date, the ACLU took further steps to neutralize criticism by denouncing as legally untenable the principle of guilt by association. Oh, that's an interesting attack, isn't it? So you could be found to be hanging out with lots of communist revolutionaries. You could be hanging out with a bunch of people who have schemes and plans and plots to cause mayhem and destruction. But they want to say, well, just because you're hanging out with people who do that doesn't mean you yourself are guilty. Just because you were at the secret meeting of communists and where they were making Molotov cocktails and planning to unleash mayhem, just because you were there doesn't mean you're guilty, does it? So it's that kind of wheedling around and worming your way out of accountability and, muddying the water and making things difficult to interpret. Good morning, Ashley. In view of its origins and history, one might reasonably doubt the depth of ACLU devotion to the flag and the Constitution. It does not necessarily follow, however, that preservation of the Communist Party is the main purpose of the ACLU. In protecting the shock troops of social revolution, it has successfully deflected or blunted any incipient attack on the big guns in the rear. The intellectual leaders of the socialist movement in America, a number of whom served on the original board and national committee, and whose modern counterparts still serve there today. This tactic of defense in depth has been employed with little or no variation from the experimental beginnings of the ACLU in 1920 to its more smoothly organized operations of the present day. And just a reminder that the present day here is Rose Martin's present day, which was 1966. In a tear sheet circulated with its 35th anniversary appeal, the ACLU outlined its mid-century program as follows. Against those indiscriminate federal, state, and local measures which, though aimed at communists, threaten the civil liberties of all Americans, to make an effective civil rights program the law of the land against both governmental and private pressure group censorship of movies, plays, books, newspapers, magazines, radio and television, to promote fair procedures in court trials, congressional and administrative hearings. Acting on the novel premise that good citizens are imperiled whenever sedition is curbed or obscenity is discouraged, the American Civil Liberties Union often finds itself in the position of defending both subversion and pornography on narrowly technical grounds. At the same time, it seeks a broad interpretation of the Constitution in the area of civil rights. In its annual report for 1961 to 62, the organization applauds decisions which underscore the power of the federal courts to impose change, a power not visibly allotted to the judiciary by the United States Constitution. Of late years, the American Civil Liberties Union has also enlarged the range of its propaganda to admit lobbying by approved private pressure groups. Moreover, a certain emphasis on its own highly specialized concept of civil liberties appears to have crept into the field of mass entertainment. Wizard television lawyers, who seldom, if ever, lose a case, dramatically, quote, sell the ACLU point of view to nationwide audiences without identifying it. A liberal sampling of its latter-day activities discloses that the ACLU, while extending itself geographically and greatly multiplying its routine tasks, has never veered from its original course. In 1950, the Pittsburgh branch of the ACLU upheld the right of communists to serve on grand juries. In 1951, the National Office announced its intention of challenging all future cases brought under the Smith Act, which required Communist Party officials to register. In 1961, while protesting its opposition to communism, the organization filed a brief as a friend of the court in the Communist Party's appeal under the McCarran Internal Security Act. Public support for repeal of the McCarran Act itself was solicited by the Council for American Civil Liberties Union in Southern California. Speaking at the First Unitarian Church in Los Angeles, he flayed the McCarran Act as being the gravest danger to the Bill of Rights in the nation's history. At about the same time, the chairman of the Marin County chapter, one of 24 civil liberties branches in California, questioned the legality of a Christmas crib on the courthouse lawn in San Rafael, suggesting it violated the principle of church-state separation. On the spiritual front, the ACLU's Niagara Falls chapter also backed a test case in federal court on behalf of the black Muslims, who claimed that their, quote, right to practice their religion was obstructed in Attica State Prison, and the St. Louis ACLU committee investigated a charge that prisoners were being denied the right to buy anti-religious books and pamphlets. After praising the Supreme Court's decision, which held the non-sectarian Regent's Prayer in New York schools to be unconstitutional, the ACLU's annual report for 1961 to 62 predicted, quote, we are confident that when more sectarian religious practices in the schools are brought to the court's attention, they will be declared unconstitutional. Christmas and Chanukah observance, Bible reading, recitation of the Lord's Prayer, and baccalaureate services. With the aid of ACLU lawyers, that impious hope has since been fulfilled. So here we're kind of seeing this ACLU really working to undermine spirituality, which, you know, I don't want to say religion. They're undermining religion, organized religion, let's say. But in doing so, and they obviously have arguments which resonate with people because things can be done that are quite evil and terrible under the auspices of, in the name of a given religion, in all of them probably. But they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater as well by saying, okay, we need to get rid of all religion, all spirituality, and we'll just keep it all atheistic, scientific, keep it all in 5 sense reality, and just do away with, you know, the spirit, the metaphysics, and that whole side of things, which then reinforces this idea of humanity as a herd which need to be managed and kind of coddled and kept under control at all times by this sort of self-styled, self-named, self-proclaimed elite class, right? As might also have been predicted, the ACLU filed a friend of the court brief in behalf of Dr. Robert Soblin, the convicted Soviet spy, who for years had headed New York State's largest public mental health institution. It appealed a federal district court decision holding that American-born Herman Marx had forfeited citizenship rights by serving in the Cuban rebel army of Fidel Castro. In February 1962, it petitioned the Senate's Post Office and Civil Service Committee to reject an amendment to the postal rate bill banning the distribution of communist propaganda. While upholding freedom of agitation for communists and even for crypto-Nazi agent provocateur, the ACLU sought to deny military commanders the right to arm their personnel against the fallacies of communist propaganda. Though the lack of such instruction had caused an undisclosed number of soldiers and junior officers to yield to brainwashing by Chinese communists during the Korean War. In March 1962, the Civil Liberties Group submitted a memorandum to the Special Preparedness Committee of the Armed Services Committee, asserting that restriction of free speech for the nation's military leaders, quote, raises no civil liberties issue. So they're attacking free speech here. Many of the ACLU's views sooner or later have found expression in political action. On August 17, 1963, for example, members of the ACLU college chapters, acting jointly with the Students for Democratic Action, induced the Western States Conference of Young Democrats in Berkeley, California, to pass a resolution calling for repeal of the McCarran Internal Security Act. It is noteworthy that in California alone, branches of the ACLU existed in 1962 at the University of California, California Institute of Technology, Long Beach State College, Los Angeles City College, Los Angeles State College, and San Diego State College. These are among the long-term fruits of the Organizing Committee on Academic Freedom, one of its most significant and least publicized activities. The Committee on Academic Freedom was formed in 1924 at a time when teachers and college professors were being urged to express themselves openly about the Sacco-Vanzetti case and to participate in progressive political action. The original statement of the committee was prepared by Dr. Harry F. Ward, chairman of the ACLU, and Dr. Henry R. Linville, president of the Teachers Union. Nominally created to aid teachers and college professors threatened with dismissal for unorthodox views, this committee progressively opened the way for the free and ever freer dissemination of radical ideas in schools and colleges. Through its ties with the American Federation of Teachers, the American Association of University Professors, and various, quote, progressive educational bodies, it was eventually able to exert a potent influence not only on the formulation of academic policies, but on the type of individuals accepted for employment. So these moves that they're making are laying the groundwork for the situation that America and probably England, UK as well, finds itself in, where the overwhelming majority of university faculty are left-leaning, Marxist, communist type people. That's been borne out, I think, by stories such as Brett Weinstein being hunted and hounded off campus, and Jonathan Haidt's done good work on this sort of thing. Who's the other person? The New Discourses. He did James Lindsay. So this thing that we often describe as woke in the modern day, we say it's woke, or W-O-K-E, woke. That's all very much based in the kind of stuff, has the history of that and the prominence of it, I would argue, probably goes back to this kind of time where the ACLU is going around and loosening the constraints on what kind of radical ideas can and cannot be talked about. I think there's probably a link there to explain how we ended up in the situation we're in now. Even though this was written back in the 60s, that is the gradualism, that is the slow plodding, tortoise-like way of doing things. It takes quite a few decades for these plans to manifest in their entirety, but now we're in a situation, like when you think about it, all universities should be roughly 50-50. If the political system has any value, this left-right paradigm, which is kind of an illusion, but you would think at least in university staff, you would have a balance, and therefore the people going through that system would be exposed to both sides and be able and be empowered and informed and educated to make their own minds up. But they're not. They're overwhelmingly indoctrinated to the left side of things, to the rainbow-colored side of things, to the smash the patriarchy, let's bring back communism side of things, which you can see interviews and clips online of people openly saying, I'm a socialist, I'm a communist, I'm a Marxist, and it's not a taboo. It's not at all controversial to say that, and it bloody well should be. Okay. Where were we at? Oh, so they were talking about the type of individuals accepted for employment. So this is getting their people into the system to corrupt it or at least repurpose it from within. By 1938, the members of this committee were described as being, quote, among the outstanding leaders in American education. And this reminds me of how this class of people always like to give themselves and each other awards and medals. And, all of the, like, whether it's the film awards, the Oscars, or whether it's things like the Charlemagne Prize, which I've talked about on this channel, which is doled out every year to people who've done exceptional work in basically enhancing and establishing and accelerating the integration of a control system across the whole of Europe, then the world. These awards that get handed out, Nobel Peace Prize going to Obama, for example, whenever there's awards being given out and praise being adulated upon people, you got to look at that with suspicion and recognize that there's probably much more to the story there. It's kind of like the Guardian article that we read, I think, on Tuesday, which was talking about how the Webbs and George Bernard Shaw, really, they ought to be infamous, not famous. Their names ought to be infamous, and everyone ought to be going to great pains and great lengths to disassociate themselves from these people. But instead, they're not. They're still praised. Their reading materials are still taught, plays, books, novels. They still have buildings named after them, and they're still kind of highly regarded and celebrated as heroes of the left. The committee included 3 college presidents of Vassar, Wisconsin, and Mount Holyoke. All but one of the group were listed in Who's Who in America or Who's Who in New York. A biographical breakdown by Dr. David E. Bunting, Dean of the University of Tampa, revealed that the typical committee member was then 58 years old, had a doctor's degree, and was a full professor in a major American university. Though economically comfortable, he was not wealthy. Politically, he either voted independently or for the Democratic Party. He belonged to at least 4 organizations espousing a, quote, liberal point of view. And remember, Rose Martin's putting liberal here in quotations because they couldn't call themselves outright socialists and communists because back then that was still taboo and still controversial. So instead, they took up this label of liberal and like, oh, we're liberal. We just want to increase liberty for communists and socialists. He belonged to at least 4 organizations espousing a liberal point of view, was a member of the Progressive Education Association and usually of the American Federation of Teachers. He was the author of at least 3 books, either on education or branches of the social sciences. Obviously, he was neither an average American nor an ordinary teacher, but a recognized expert in his chosen field whose opinions were listened to with respect. What Dr. Bunting failed to mention was that fully half of the committee's 28 members were also longtime cooperators of the League for Industrial Democracy. And if you recall, the League for Industrial Democracy is what the Intercollegiate Socialist Society rebranded itself right about the time people were looking at the famines and the Russian Revolution, which caused them, and saying, you know, this communist socialism thing, I'm not sure it's such a good thing. And so the ISS had to quickly rebrand itself, and they took the label Industrial Democracy without changing their aims or their goals or their strategies. They just they continued to be a wolf. It's just that they changed the clothing that they were wearing. The key organization for the advancement of Fabian socialism in America. Yeah, so that's the League for Industrial Democracy was the key organization for the advancement of Fabian socialism in America. They subscribed and or contributed to the publications of the American Council on Public Affairs, which, quote, encouraged properly qualified scholars to give greater attention to the background, analysis, and solution of contemporary problems. Thus, social, economic, and political views considered acceptable by the League for Industrial Democracy and the American Civil Liberties Union were transmitted indirectly to the nation's educators, who were, quote, encouraged to apply them not only as teachers, but also in the field of public affairs. Unobtrusively, the Committee on Academic Freedom in New York, working intimately with the LID-sponsored Council on Public Affairs in Washington, also promoted and accelerated a movement to bring, quote, properly qualified scholars into Washington, as well as into state and municipal governments, there to steer as far as possible the affairs of the nation. As the British Fabian philosopher John Atkinson Hobson had foretold, the university professor would become the secret weapon of socialist strategy on a broader scale than ever before. The Doctor of Philosophy, with a certified, quote, progressive and, quote, democratic outlook, was being groomed to invade the administrative branches of government, no longer singly, but en masse. The specialized meaning concealed in such terms as progress and democracy was disclosed by Roger Baldwin, chief spokesman for the ACLU, who now addressed himself with increasing frequency to academic audiences. In his book, Civil Liberties and Industrial Conflict, written jointly with C.B. Randall and published by the Harvard University Press, Baldwin admitted frankly that while many persons regarded civil liberties as ends in themselves, he believed them to be, quote, means for non-violent progress. Progress, he said, meant, quote, the extension of the control of social institutions by progressively larger classes until human society ultimately abolishes the violence of class conflict. If not quite orthodox Marxist doctrine, this was a mere variation on it in terms of the fluid classes existing in American society. So this is a really core idea, isn't it? This quote here, the extension of control of social institutions by progressively larger classes until human society ultimately abolishes the violence of class conflict. And I think what is not often said is the people who are in control of the social institutions, they're going to be a different class than the people who are living under and within these social institutions, right? So it's a non-starter. Right there, it's incoherent from the beginning. But they always promise, oh, when we just have the revolution, when the workers get in control, then it'll all be good and we'll get to this communist utopia on the other side of that socialist system. But it's just inherently contradictory and doesn't make any sense. And I think that's what she wrote about earlier when she was saying that people were not trained to identify the logical fallacies and the contradictions within communist and Marxist and socialist doctrine and ideology. And then it's even harder when it's not labeled as such and labeled for what it is, you know. But it really does appeal to people's better nature, because I remember reading a book by George Monbiot, and it was called The Age of Consent. And at the time, I thought it was a fantastic book, a really good idea. But now, looking back, thinking what he advocated in that book, he was really just advocating top-down, centralized world government, which is the same as H.G. Wells advocated, which is the same as Bertrand Russell advocated, which is the same as socialism, which becomes communism, which becomes top-down world control, one world government. It's like the different stages on the path towards the same thing. But, you know, back when I read that book by George Monbiot, The Age of Consent, I was like, oh, this is a fantastic idea. Yeah, this really would solve all the world's problems. And I was a bit more naive and innocent and, you know, ripe for being indoctrinated into supporting that kind of thing. But now I know a little bit more, and I don't think I would sign up to that. Okay, continuing. Speaking at the 1936 Spring Conference of the Eastern States Association of Professional Schools for Teachers, Baldwin had also explained that by progressive, he meant the forces working for the democratization of industry by extending public ownership and control, which alone will abolish the power of the comparatively few who own the wealth. But will it? Real democracy, he stated on another occasion, means strong trade unions, government regulation of business, ownership by the people of industries that serve the public. See, it's all noble sounding, good sounding stuff on the surface, like on the face of it, isn't it? That, of course, was not at all what progress and democracy implied to the average American. But Roger Baldwin was no average American, nor were the educators whom he was educating. They belonged to a rapidly expanding, carefully controlled intellectual elite who, by habitually using familiar terms to convey something quite different to each other than these terms meant to the general public, would guide America unawares along the road to that cooperative commonwealth which British Fabians also called industrial democracy. Yeah, so that's a really key part here about using familiar terms to convey something different to each other than the terms meant to the general public. That is a really just a sinister, underhand, cowardly tactic when you have it's the knowledge gap. It's the knowledge differential. And I'm going to use a word, and I know what you think it means, but I'm using it in a totally different way, different meaning, different context. And I know you don't understand the way I'm using it, but I'm going to talk to you anyway and lead you down the garden path. And run rings around you and get you to agree to things, and you have no idea what you're agreeing to. And it's kind of the manipulation of the mind, and it's why it's so important to establish terms and to before you get into any disagreement or argument. And quite often this can be a good way to diffuse those tense disagreements and arguments. So if you just say, hold on a minute, okay, let's define the word that we're talking about here. And check that you have find a definition of it that you can agree on, right? And sometimes that can really diffuse tension and stress and argument. Like you might be talking to somebody about injections. I'm not going to use the V word, but I think you know what I'm talking about. And you might be having a heated disagreement and argument, and then you say, okay, well, let's define it. Like, do you mean a medical intervention that is administered intravenously, which contains the the attenuated form of a virus which has been purified and isolated? Is that what you mean by the V word, or do you mean a piece of RNA that is encased and wrapped in nanolipid particles, which inserts itself into your cells and instructs those cells to produce a protein? Or is that what you mean? Because those two things that I just described are very, very different things, and yet they both are referred to as by the V word. And most people don't know about the second one, and they assume that when they hear the V word that they're being talked to about the first one. So that's a real world recent example of exactly this strategy described here. It's like they're using a word. They know you all think it means one thing. They've quietly, slyly changed its meaning over here in the Merriam-Webster dictionary and not told anybody. And they're using it according to their definition over here, which they didn't announce and they didn't update everybody with. And they know that. But because they've published it somewhere, and it is public knowledge somewhere, then it's your fault for not having kept up to date and checked that out. And therefore, if you become injured or you get damaged through the decision you make, it's on you because, you didn't do your research first and you didn't come to terms first before you engaged in the decision-making process. Okay, so this is why coming to terms, which just means defining your terms and agreeing upon those definitions, this is why it's so incredibly important. And it's a very good habit to get into when you are talking to other people, especially if it's getting heated or stressful. And you'll know the quality of the person you're talking to if they can agree to sit down and hammer out some definitions that you can both agree on first. If they're unwilling to do that, if they think you're being difficult or pedantic, then it's probably not worth pursuing that conversation with that person, and just talk to them about the Eurovision Song Contest or the new Netflix series about the person that murders the other person. You know which one I'm talking about. That one about murder, where the people get murdered and then the people solve the murder and a lot of people die and it's really gruesome and gory. You know that one? Yeah, they're all like that. Okay, rant over. But I think you get the point. Part 2. Imitative in matters of basic policy, the League for Industrial Democracy outstripped its British Fabian tutors in techniques of deception. For more than half a century, the Fabian Society of London had solemnly required every member to subscribe to the basis. When that strange document was finally replaced by a modern constitution, the first line of the letter still read, "The Fabian Society consists of socialists." True, the society also had its prized semi-undercover collaborators, among others such personages as Sir William Beveridge and John Maynard Keynes, who retained nominal membership in a virtually extinct Liberal Party. Nevertheless, anyone known to belong to the Fabian Society of London or its affiliates could automatically be termed a socialist. I'm just going to make a note here to look up more about this Beveridge character, because his name's popped up a few times and I always forget to look him up. Sir William Beveridge. But yeah, John Maynard Keynes, we did a good little survey of his Wikipedia article and quite a lot of revealing stuff on there. And I also talked to Nigel Watson, the ex-economics teacher, about Maynard Keynes and Keynesian economics and the role that played in, or plays still to this day, in rolling out this socialism, communism, technocracy system, which we're rapidly barreling into because not enough people read this book. For reasons of expediency, this relatively forthright practice was abandoned by the Fabian Society's American counterpart, the LID. Members were not only encouraged to conceal the fact of the LID's British Fabian inspiration, as though it were a bar sinister, but even to deny publicly that they were socialists, if in doing so they could more effectively promote socialist policies. As Upton Sinclair noted, some old-timers were displeased when the organization ceased in 1921 to call itself a socialist society. Yet the advantage of that fraudulent gesture became increasingly apparent as individual members of the LID were propelled to eminence in their chosen fields. Shock. How about that? They just got propelled to eminence. Climbers, I bet they were given awards as well, weren't they? Climbers, as well as those who had already arrived, were shielded by the League's failure to publish annual membership lists. Confronted with evidence that had once held office in the Intercollegiate Socialist Society or the Students' League for Industrial Democracy, a public figure often dismissed it blandly as a folly of youth, long since outgrown. That convenient loophole has been employed by such widely disparate characters as Walter Lippmann and Walter Ruther, president of the United Automobile Workers Union and a vice president of the AFL-CIO, as well as by a number of equal and lesser luminaries. A glance at the record, however, demonstrates that remarkably few of the persons admitted to the League's charmed circle of social and professional benefits have actually fallen away. The complacent truism, join for 1 year, join for 50, has proved to be as true of the League for Industrial Democracy as of its senior partner in the London Fabian Society. And also going to make a note to look up Walter Lippmann, because that's another name I have heard, but I don't know where or why. It seems to me that he was just a bit of a propagandist, though. In 1943, the League modified its constitution not solely for reasons of tax exemption, but also for the sake of improved wartime camouflage. Its purpose was now asserted to be education for increasing democracy in our economic, political, and cultural life. Knowledgeable insiders, of course, understood democracy to mean what Roger Baldwin and others had already defined it to mean, namely, government regulation of business leading eventually to public ownership and/or control of industry. Chiefly accomplished through the pressure and voting power of strong socialist-controlled unions. Socialism was the, quote, true democracy to be attained by anesthesia rather than violence. What final consolidation might mean was another matter, never mentioned. If anyone was deceived by the new terminology, it was only the general public. Somewhat indiscreetly, however, British Fabians still continued to acknowledge the LID as the leading socialist society in America. In Fabian Society annual reports of 1925 to 1930, it was even patronizingly referred to as one of our provincial societies. As late as 1962, Margaret Cole, while carefully minimizing its importance, recognized the LID to be among the principal overseas affiliates of the Fabian Society. Its value in complementing the plans of British socialists was indicated by Norman Thomas, head of the American Socialist Party, when he stated in a pamphlet published by the LID in 1953, quote, Britain's problems admit no solution on a purely nationalist level. Past or present, it thus becomes difficult for the LID to deny its relationship with the leading socialist society of Great Britain. Files of Fabian News reveal that for years League members attended or lectured at Fabian summer schools. Articles by LID publicists have consistently appeared in Fabian periodicals. When a League official enhanced his prestige by joining the Fabian Society of London, the item was occasionally reported in England, if not in America. Over 30 years ago, for example, Clarence Sr., long a national director of the LID and from 1961 a White House consultant on Latin American affairs, was received into the London Society. Fabian News innocently reported the event in its issue of July 1929. Lately, however, the Society has refrained from printing the names of American members or even guests, because this tends to brand them ipso facto as socialists. To the LID's 45th anniversary event, Lady Dorothy Archibald, Fabian Socialist member of the London County Council, sent the following cautious tribute. Quote, I have come to the conclusion that there are no shortcuts to progress, but that the long and arduous road of education is the only certain way. This is the road you have followed for 45 years, and, knowing your country a little, I feel that your work is as necessary as is the work of the Fabian Society in this country. When I was directing a Fabian summer school last year, I had the great pleasure of having several young Americans as students. Their contribution to the school was outstanding, and I was happy to discover that they were members of the LID. It is my profound hope that the field of your work may extend every year so that the younger generation in America may receive an education in real democracy. Greetings from home on the same occasion included telegrams from Senator Hubert Humphrey and the then Congressman Jacob K. Javits, Henry A. Overstreet, Upton Sinclair, Robert Moores Lovett, and the Reverend John Haynes Holmes. Leading all the rest, however, was a wire from Eleanor Roosevelt. As a long-standing cooperator and sponsor of the LID, she could hardly have failed to be familiar with its definition of democracy. Her message, though confounding to purists in political science, was readily grasped by persons attending the League's anniversary luncheon. It read, quote, "I hope you will have a successful conference and will stress the need for making democracy work for all people as a form of government and a way of life." To the day of her death, Eleanor Roosevelt supported the League for Industrial Democracy and half a dozen closely related organizations, a fact which she never troubled to conceal. She was introduced to it through her good friends Florence Kelley, Paul Kellogg of Survey Magazine, that is, and Lillian Wald of the Henry Street Settlement, all of whom served as officers and or directors of the organization. As her telegram suggests, Eleanor Roosevelt's attachment to the LID was based on practical as well as idealistic considerations. Through another close friend and early social worker, Francis Perkins, who had served as Governor Roosevelt's New York State's Commissioner of Labor, Eleanor Roosevelt was well informed about the potential ability of the needle trades unions in New York City to deliver the margin of victory in state elections. Top officials of both the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America and the International Ladies Garment Workers Union served routinely as officers and directors of the LID. Delegates to the 1944 Democratic Party Convention in Chicago still recall the cryptic remark attributed at that time to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. "Clear it with Sidney." Sidney, of course, was Sidney Hillman, then president of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers. I was sure he was going to say Sidney Webb there. Survivors of the Roosevelt era will also remember Joseph Lash, a controversial young protege of Eleanor Roosevelt, whom she invited occasionally to the White House and aided in obtaining a military commission during World War II. Few are aware, however, that Joe Lash was a leader of the Students' League for Industrial Democracy in the 1930s, when it boasted over 100 chapters and collaborated with communist-led youth groups. It published a magazine called Revolt, later known as The Student's Outlook. Nominally, SLID was working for, quote, peace. To that end, it opposed Reserve Officers Training Corps drill in high schools. To that end, it opposed Reserve Officers Training Corps drill in high schools and colleges and urged severe limitations on military preparedness. In those years, the Students' League also urged its members to aid professed anti-fascist movements in Europe and agitated actively in favor of what it termed civil rights for American strikers. Student chapters assisted the LID Emergency Committee for Strikers' Relief, whose chairman was Norman Thomas and whose secretary was theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, with John Hurling, present-day Labour columnist for the Washington Daily News, serving as their assistant. Among the more promising junior leaguers of that day were two sons of an old-fashioned Marxian socialist of German extraction who had settled in the American Midwest. The boys were Walter and Victor Ruther, potent names in American labor today. As president in 1932 of the SLID chapter at Wayne University, red-haired Walter led a student delegation on the picket line at the Briggs Body plant in Detroit. In 1933, the two eager young socialists spent a summer running errands for the anti-Hitler underground in Germany, and then were employed for about 18 months at the Ford automobile plant in Soviet Russia, sending back glowing reports on the workers' fatherland. Schooled in the newer techniques for capturing union leadership, Walter and Victor returned home in time to help lead the Automobile Workers' Industrial Union, originally a part of the Red trade union apparatus, into the Congress of Industrial Organizations. The reorganized and expanded mass union, known as the United Automobile Workers Union, UAW, subsequently ejected the better-known communists from its midst, and control of that increasingly powerful labour body passed into socialist hands. The only difficulty then was, and still is, that no one has ever been sure how many of those undercover socialists still remained communists at heart. The manoeuvre was not generally understood at the time, and is less understood today. When it became obvious, even to the communists, that American working people would not accept communist direction, but might follow social democratic leaders as long as they did not frankly call themselves socialists, younger men, carefully trained for such a contingency, took over. The Ruther brothers, who always had a foot in the socialist camp, were ideally prepared for the role. They have been long-time collaborators and directors of the Adult League for Industrial Democracy, and at present hold membership in a number of its loftier latter-day offshoots. From 1933, SLID cooperated with various direct action youth groups, and in 1935 merged openly with them to form the American Student Union. According to Mina Weisenberg, a historian and director of the LID, the ASU, quote, became deeply infiltrated with communists. After 5 years, the Students' League split away, not because it had any real quarrel with the Marxist philosophy of its associates, but because, as Mina Weisenberg states, it found some difficulty in justifying the Soviet Union's invasion of Finland. Owing to the red cloud which had dimmed its name, SLID did not publicly re-establish its college chapters until after World War II. The paid staff then included James E. Youngdahl, a nephew of the liberal Republican Washington jurist who dismissed the Owen Lattimore case, and James Farmer, who went on to become National Director of the Negro Council on Racial Equality. It was not until 1947 that the Students' League took the precaution of barring known communists from membership. Throughout the entire decade of the 1940s, however, a 6-week summer course resembling certain Fabian summer schools in England was held annually by the League for Industrial Democracy to train young college people for organizing and for other union work. According to official League historians, SLID had allegedly acted against the advice of the senior body when it merged with the National Student Union in 1935, and for 5 years appeared to have severed its connection with the adult LID. Actually, SLID members were only following the example of their elders, many of whom drifted farther and farther leftward during the same period, as their Fabian counterparts in Britain were likewise doing in the 1930s. A singular predilection for communists was evinced in that era of the United Front. It was confirmed by the fact that many high-ranking LID officials lent their names to organizations and committees since identified as communist-controlled. The very amiable Robert Morse Lovett, who personally aided the National Student Union in its final years as president of the League, is alleged to have held membership during his lifetime in some 50 Communist Front organizations. A. Philip Randolph, longtime LID official and a socialist leader in the present-day agitation for Negro civil rights, has been connected with numerous organizations which were cited as communist fronts by federal authorities and/or state or territorial investigating committees. In the cloud cuckoo land of Fabian socialism's many cooperative ventures, individuals later cited in connection with Soviet espionage were also recruited, among others, Frederick Vanderbilt Field. Undeniably united front activities in which communists, socialists, and an undetermined number of innocents were involved flourished in America as in Britain prior to the outbreak of World War II. By some irony of fate, however, it proved a saving grace for the LID that certain outstanding figures in its New York City chapter decided at the same time to champion the cause of the exiled and subsequently murdered Leon Trotsky. This very vocal group included John Dewey, professor of philosophy at Columbia University, Sidney Hook, chairman of the Department of Philosophy at New York University, officials of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, editors of the Social Democratic New Leader, and others. By virtue of being anti-Stalinist, they were presumed to be anti-Marxist and pro-American. As late as 1952, some of them were regarded as allies and editorial outlets by supporters of the late Senator Joseph McCarthy. Once again, as in the bygone 20s, the LID was able to sidestep unwelcome notoriety and avoid being stigmatized as the effective leadership group of international socialism in America. The radical nature of the League for Industrial Democracy should have been obvious from the start, since its original officers and directors included such well-known early Socialist Party leaders as Morris Hillquit, August Classens, and Eugene V. Debs. In the 1924 national elections, however, the majority of LID members and friends promoted the Conference for Progressive Political Action and supported the presidential candidacy of Senator Robert M. La Follette. Since 1928, they have thrown their weight behind the Democratic Party's top candidate in New York State, and from 1936, they have done the same for the national ticket. Nevertheless, the Socialist Party continued to run a nominal candidate for the presidency, who was invariably a permanent officer of the LID. In 6 national elections, that token candidate was Norman Thomas, a former Protestant clergyman who had once headed the LID student chapter at Princeton. A naive American of Anglo-Saxon stock, Thomas possessed a mellow voice, a booming laugh, and a sophisticated low-pressure approach which proved highly attractive to educators and professionals. While he never entertained the faintest hope of being elected, Thomas had reasons for keeping his name on the ballot. Among other things, his position as titular head of the Socialist Party carried with it the right of representation in the Fabian-dominated Socialist International. Until his retirement in 1962, it was usually Norman Thomas who headed United States delegations to Congresses of the Socialist International and transmitted the ensuing directives to interested groups in the United States. The restatement of socialist aims emerging from the International's Frankfurt Congress in 1951, which found expression in the New Fabian Essays in Britain, was duly interpreted for Americans by Norman Thomas in a significant pamphlet entitled Democratic Socialism, published in 1953 by the LID. His statement served as a lodestar for all domestic Fabian socialists, avowed or unavowed. For the edification of any innocents who still persist in regarding Norman Thomas as a true blue American, distinguished for his apparently selfless advocacy of a broad program of social reform, it may be noted that he declared in this pamphlet, quote, "My definition of modern socialism accords with the Socialist Statement on Aims and Tasks, which was adopted by the Congress of Socialist Parties at Frankfurt, Germany in 1951. It closely parallels Socialism, a New Statement of Principles, presented in 1952 by the British Socialist Union." Like the British comrades, Thomas frankly advocated, quote, "the social ownership of such key industries as steel," while refusing to discuss democratic socialism in such misleading terms as total social ownership versus total private ownership. He explained that some followers of Karl Marx, for example Karl Kautsky, never insisted on the need for social ownership of all means of production and distribution. Neither, as a matter of fact, did the Fabian basis. The Machiavellian foresight of Sidney Webb, disclosed long before in Labour and the New Social Order, was tacitly reflected in Thomas's declaration. Quote, "We have learned that it is possible to a degree not anticipated by most earlier socialists to impose desirable social controls on privately owned enterprises by the development of social planning, by proper taxation and labour legislation, and by the growth of powerful labour organisations. Still more significantly, Thomas added, for some years, American socialists have been fairly well agreed that social ownership should be extended to the commanding heights of our economy, which include our natural resources, our system of money, banking and credit, and certain basic industries and services. I have already argued the specific reason for public ownership of the steel industry. It meets all the tests which I have earlier suggested. An identical programme for Britain was urged at virtually the same time by the late parliamentary leader of the British Labour Party, Hugh Gaitskell, in Fabian Tracts No. 300, Socialism and Nationalisation. It has since been reaffirmed by his successor Harold Wilson, who pledged himself to carry out the policies of Gaitskell. In defining the relationship of democratic socialism to communism, Norman Thomas made a plea for non-orthodox Marxism, especially in the United States, where we still have a middle class in a true economic sense, while those who think of themselves as belonging to the middle class are even more numerous. Pointedly, he criticized Russian communism as being, quote, a betrayal of socialism and a subversion of true Marxism. He condemned statism and questioned, quote, the necessity of a dictatorial elite in Russia, without referring to the invisible socialist elite in America that proposed to utilize the outward forms of democracy in order to impose a gradually tightening system of centralized controls. While deploring Soviet deceit and violence, at no point did Thomas recommend hostility towards communism. Other associations of men, said Thomas, improving on the natural law, have an inherent right to exist. Conscious, however, of the adverse effect which identification with an unpopular cause might have on socialists in America, Thomas uttered a clear warning to followers and friends. Russian communism, said he, in its march to power, has so successfully claimed Marx for its own. It has so persuaded men that Lenin and Stalin are the true successors of Karl Marx, that the socialist who rests his case upon Marx as upon a Bible has to fight an uphill battle. Marxist orthodoxy does not give the democratic socialist the best vantage point for his struggle. Almost verbatim, Thomas echoed the sentiments expressed by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels during their lifetime concerning the most effective way to social revolution in the United States. Through Norman Thomas, the past and present leaders of international socialism spoke to the New World. Thus, the importance of his remarks cannot be measured in terms of the trifling vote which he commanded as the American Socialist Party's candidate. One apparent reason for keeping that party alive has been to mislead the American public as to the true strength of the socialist movement in the United States, by conveying the impression it is far too tiny to represent a serious threat. Even Thomas himself admitted, as recently as July 13, 1963, in a television interview with Paul Coates, carried over California stations, that socialists in this country who do not vote for the Socialist Party, quote, have usually found it better to vote Democrat. Many are so-called independents, committed to a program rather than a party, who forever tease aspiring Republicans with the hope they can be wooed and won. Nor should the influence of Thomas's statement be gauged by the limited size of the League for Industrial Democracy, which circulated the pamphlet. While the official membership of the adult LID never claimed more than 4,000 or 5,000 at any time, like the Fabian Society, it was a pilot organization, whose members already commanded the heights in many sectors of American life, political, educational, religious, trades union, and cultural. Bishop Francis J. McConnell, for example, a former president of the Federal Council of Churches, who signed the so-called Bankers Report of 1933, advocating recognition of Soviet Russia, was a long vice president of the League. As vice president of Union Theological Seminary, the patriarchal Dr. Reinhold Niebuhr, had also helped to shape the social thinking of generations of young seminarians. Former president of the LID New York chapter and former treasurer and board member of the national body, Niebuhr probably lent his name to more socialist-inspired committees and organizations than any other living American. Nor did age diminish the old master's skill in attracting highly placed sympathizers. As late as September 1963, Attorney General Robert Kennedy announced that one of the 10 books he would take with him, if going to the moon, would be the Reinhold Niebuhr's book, with the oddly Manichaean title, Children of Light and Children of Darkness, an unusual choice for a Catholic. In the field of labour, the League's officers and national directors have included some of the most commanding figures in recent industrial union history. Among others, David Dubinsky of the International Ladies' Garment Workers, Jacob Patofsky of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers, Walter Ruther of the Automobile Workers, Arthur J. Hayes of the Machinists, James Carey, erstwhile head of the Union of Electrical Radio and Machine Workers, A. Philip Randolph of the Pullman Car Porters, and Boris Shiskin, former educational director of the American Federation of Labor. William Green and his more liberal successor, George Meany, president of the AFL-CIO and recipient of a League Award, seldom ventured to refuse an invitation to address LID conferences. While LID control of trade union machinery was not all-embracing, and was certainly far less obvious than that of the Fabian Society in Britain, at least it provided a firm base of political and financial support for internationally derived socialist programs in several key electoral states. Notably New York, New Jersey, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Illinois. A small galaxy of United States senators has been listed among the LID veteran collaborators. That senior legislative group includes Paul H. Douglas of Illinois, Wayne Morse of Oregon, Hubert Humphrey of Minnesota, and the late Richard Neuberger and his widow, Marie Neuberger of Oregon, the late Herbert Lehman of New York, and Jacob K. Javits, who, as a congressman, was for years a regular and applauded speaker at League conferences. It was Senator Lehman, however, who distinguished himself at the League's 45th anniversary symposium on freedom and the welfare state by saying, quote, 170 years ago, the welfare state concept was translated into the basic law of this land by the founders of the Republic. The founding fathers were the ones who really originated the welfare state. An astounding misuse of the measured phrase in the preamble to the Constitution, quote, to create a more perfect union and to promote the general welfare. All the more so because the definition of welfare has suffered several changes since 1787. The weight exerted to this day by individual LID members and their trainees in education, government administration, the United Nations, and the private research foundations is subject matter for separate study. A whole chain of interlocking organizations aspiring to mold the outlook of public opinion makers and to draft the policies of United States government agencies has quietly come into being, each with a solid core of LID elder statesmen and their younger disciples. By no means have all of the League's tried and true supporters found it necessary to choose the hard way. In adapting the tactics and programs of British Fabianism to our native scene, the small, once struggling and always reticent League for Industrial Democracy fulfilled its mission of penetrating and permeating the fabric of American life. Its peculiarity stemmed from the fact that it was the first to last a socialist creation. Although the accent might be American, its voice was the voice of international socialism controlled by British Fabians. I'm just going to have to pause there, take a sip. And I'll catch up on the comments as well. Why not? I've seen a few rolling in. Oh, this is a long chapter, isn't it? Or is it just me? Okay, good morning, CESP. Gwen was saying they actually altered the dictionary. This is they do it. They've done it a few times, haven't they? Certainly, but the V word referring to the injections, that one definitely changed. LJ, they either go silent and stare into the distance or smirk. I found. Why would they want to hurt us? Popular comment. In answer to that, I would say because it's the same. Because we're a herd. They don't, they want to keep people. It's not that they want to hurt, but they want to keep people kind of harmless and dumb and ineffective and confused and lethargic and demoralized and lazy and apathetic and contained within a very small, predictable set of behaviors so that they can remain in control. I mean, you wouldn't want all the animals on the farm to get together and organize themselves in order to, take over the farmhouse that the farmer and his family live in. That's basically the analogy. Except we're not animals of the same sort of level, right? But yeah, these are difficult conversations to have, I know. And getting into definitions of words with people tends to identify the nerds from the non-nerds. Hasdak, hello. Giving us a bit of info on William Beveridge. Was born in Bengal, India. He was a eugenicist and played a central part in designing the UK welfare state. Yeah, John Maynard Keynes as well was also president of the British Eugenics Society for 10 years or something. So you've got Keynes doing the economic system. You've got Beveridge doing the welfare system. Both of them card-carrying avowed eugenicists. Dave, hello, Dave Stevenson. Sunbathing and listening to Fabian plot to enslave the world. Lovely stuff. What else could you want on a beautiful sunny day, right? Ashley says, unfortunately, a relative of mine is Chatham House. Ooh, former first secretary of the British Embassy in Beijing and wrote articles for the WEF. He's right up there, higher than the Cabinet Office and an asshole. Well, excellently put and fascinating testimony. And I'm not surprised about that last part. LJ giving us some context and information on Walter Lippmann. Says he was American writer, reporter, political commentator. Went to Harvard. His spouse was Helen Byrne or two spouses. Spouses? I guess that's the plural of spouse, isn't it? Helen Byrne and Faye Alberson. He wrote quite a few books, older ones. The Phantom Public, Liberty and the News, The Good Society. Okay. The Phantom Public. That sounds like an interesting one. LJ says he died 85 years old in 1974. New York Times has a lot on him. Wicked. Stella's here. Good evening, Stella. I guess it's good night where you are. Good evening, good night, because you're talking about bedtime stories. I love a good bedtime story. Australian PM Bob Hawke is a Fabian, apparently. Okay. Oh, that was in the 70s. And he holds the record for sculling a yard glass. It still stands. I don't know what sculling a yard glass means. So Stella, if you're still in the audience, please let us know what that means. I've never heard that before. Is it something to do with drinking beer? That's my guess. It's some alcohol drinking challenge, is it? Gwen says it would be difficult to find one that was not a eugenicist. Yeah, but the reason I mention that is when you're talking to people and you're trying to say, look, the system that we live in is literally built and designed by eugenicists. Why would they want to harm us? It's like, because they're eugenicists. Look, Keynes, eugenicist, Beveridge, eugenicist, and they created the economic system and the welfare system that we live in. And then you can go into eugenics versus dysgenics. Then you can go into look around you. Do you see healthy, vibrant, strong, lean, radiant people up and down in the streets where you live? Or are people hobbling around, driving around on those little scooters with a cigarette in their mouth, kind of dragging a carrier bag full of white lightning back from the off license? It's like who is actually thriving and doing well around you. Just look in your family, your colleagues, your friendship groups. And I hope, I pray that you are surrounded by people who are thriving and doing well and who are on a positive trajectory. And I know over a long enough term, we're all on a negative trajectory because we're all going to die. But you can be getting healthier and getting better and improving right up to your final day. There's no reason why not. We live in the most amazing time with access to the information on how to do that. And I always said to people who are my age and older, you've had the internet as long as I have. So there's no excuse for you to not know the things that I know about health and well-being. And if the people around you are not thriving and enjoying increased levels of energy and vitality and moods and focus and all these kind of things, maybe it's because we're living in systems that have been designed by eugenicists. And only the people who go outside those systems and do learning and reading and beyond what's prescribed to them in those systems and by those systems, only those people tend to be going on an upward trajectory of health and vitality and thriving and more freedom and more enjoyment in life, right? The people who do everything by the book and follow all the rules have bad outcomes. And that's because the systems have been designed by eugenicists, and eugenicists want to harm you, right? Well, Stella's back. So a yard glass holds beer, and he drank it faster than anyone. Although, I know a guy. It's a lot of beer, a long neck thing. Okay, I got you. So I was right. I was right about a yard glass. And sculling, I guess we would say in England, is downing. Down it. We'll chant that sometimes when we want... Hear that motorbike there? When we want people to drink faster, down it, down it. Gwen says, something always gets us in the end. But that is life. Yes, exactly. But it doesn't mean that you can't grow old with grace and dignity, right? Still taking good care of yourself. Still, getting involved in the gift of life and the honor and the privilege that it is to be alive and have a body and to be able to take care of it and look after it and treat it well and put only good things in it and nourish it and help it be an expression of health and vitality that other people can look to and admire and learn from, right? Your physical health is largely, not always, of course, but largely a creation of your own doing, your own habits built up over a long, long time. And yes, there are plenty of other things outside of our control, so it's not 100%, but largely it is. And there's no reason, and we're all reaping what we sow in that respect, I would say. Oh, sorry, I didn't manage to mute there before I sniffed. Okay, we haven't even finished the first chapter yet. And that whole that chapter. So we got that was going deep into the LID, the LID, the League for Industrial Democracy, and its adherents, its members. The bit that she mentioned there about how the people from this group went on to enjoy positions of influence and power, particularly in the United Nations, that was interesting to me and stood out. And I thought I would like somebody out there to go and do that bit of study and to write that book so that I can read it. Because I particularly would be interested in the link between knowing that the United Nations is a kind of forerunner or proponent of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are largely to do with, socialism and communism, in that we all, the world belongs to everyone and we are global citizens with a responsibility to look after it and take care of it, which in their view means stop driving, stop eating meat, stop going anywhere, stop having children, can't turn your heating on, can't turn your electricity on, and keep eating your, synthetic meat and your mass-produced, chemically sprayed vegetables. That's knowing that that's what it is. I'd like to know the links between the UN and the and these people, the people mentioned in this book. So if anyone knows of a study or an article or a book out there that deals with that, please let me know. I'll greedily and happily add it to my collection. But how much have we got left in this chapter? This might be the longest chapter yet. Let's see. We got to crack on though. Yeah, eating the bug stellar, exactly. Bookcam. Okay. Continuing. 3. The surprising thing is that anyone should ever have doubted the socialist intentions of the officers, members, and conscious collaborators of the League for Industrial Democracy. Successive presidents, from Robert Morse Lovett to Nathaniel Minkoff, have made no secret of their radical beliefs. There was the venerable philosopher John Dewey, father of progressive education, who was said to have inherited the pragmatic mantle of William James, yet permitted himself to be identified with the Trotskyite or Lovestonite wing of American Marxism. Next president of the LID was Elizabeth Gilman, wealthy and socially prominent spinster, a leader of the Urban League and perennial chairman of the Socialist Party in Maryland. She was followed by Bjarne Bratoy, former professor of government at Haverford College, who served in the World War II Office of Strategic Services, working intimately all the while with the Fabian International Bureau. So the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, didn't that eventually become the CIA? Or am I just imagining that? I'm pretty sure the OSS was the forerunner to the CIA. At war's end, he was employed as tutor and technical assistant to the German Social Democratic Party and thereafter became world chairman of the Fabian-dominated Socialist International. Tickly throat today. Not least, there was Mark Starr, British-born and Fabian-bred, a pet pupil of GDH and Margaret Cole. For some 30 years, he proved to be a strong, indisputable link between the New Fabian Research Bureau in London, where the modern leadership of the Fabian Society was centred, and the Fabian socialist movement in the United States. No product of Ivid Halls, Mark Starr nevertheless became president and board chairman of the foremost society of intellectual socialists in America. From 1935 to 1961, he also served as educational director of the ILGWU, perhaps the most internationally minded labor union in America, with a membership of 450,000 and declared assets of some $425 million. Through Mark Starr, the GDH Cole brand of Marxism, tinged with syndicalism, was transmitted to a potent sector of American labor. It was Starr who institutionalized a good many of the Cole's special ideas on labor politics, labor education, and political labor research in the United States. As late as 1952, he asserted that education for the abolition of private profit was the prime purpose of all education. In 1949, according to a report issued over his own signature by the ILGWU Educational Department, Mark Starr wrote Labor Politics in the USA for the British Fabian Society and a pamphlet for the United World Federalists. Published by the Fabian Society Victor Gollancz in England, Labor Politics in the USA was issued as a 56-page pamphlet by the LID. Son of a miner, Mark Starr had worked in the coal mines as a boy and served during World War I as local officer of the South Wales Miners' Federation. Referring to his origins, Starr remarked many years later in a personal letter that if he had not been a radical, he would have been a moron. I don't see why you can't be both. Possibly this view was coloured by the fact that from the age of 14 he was educated at Fabian-operated workers' schools and the London Labour College. Before emigrating to America in 1928, Starr was, for 7 years, a division officer of the National Council of Labour Colleges in Britain. He belonged to the Little Independent Labour Party, headed by some of the more stridently left-wing Fabians and openly sympathetic to the communist cause. During that period, he was also associated with Margaret Cole, a founder of New Fabian Research, who was elected president of the Fabian Society in 1963, and who took a lively interest in promoting a species of socialist indoctrination for working people broadly termed, quote, further education. On reaching New York, Starr was promptly hired to teach at Brookwood Labour College, which between 1925 and 1928 had received an outright grant of $74,227 from the Garland Fund. Soon, he was placed in charge of Brookwood extension courses, despite his own very sketchy academic background. In 1941, Starr became vice president of the American Federation of Teachers. In 1944, he was appointed labor consultant to the Office of War Information, whose director, Elmer Davis, was once a fellow director of the LID. By that time, of course, Starr had taken out American citizenship, though he preferred to consider himself a citizen of the world, and in March 1949 organized an ILGWU symposium on world government. In 1948, President Truman named Mark Starr to the United States Advisory Commission on Educational Exchange, where he remained until 1952. This commission was authorized under Public Act 402 to advise the State Department and the Congress on the operation of information centers and libraries maintained by the United States government in foreign countries, as well as on the exchange of students and technical experts. In June 1949, Starr headed the U.S. delegation to the first adult education conference organized by UNESCO at Elsinore, Denmark, where the shades of Marx, Engels, and Kautsky rather than the ghost of Hamlet's father stalked. A month later, he was lecturing at a British Labour Party summer school in Durham, England. That year, the New York City Board of Education conferred its annual Adult Students Award on Mark Starr as their prized specimen of an adult student who had made good. As educational director of the ILGWU, Starr helped to instill the Fabian socialist approach in a labour union whose early history had been marked by episodes of physical violence and the politics of left-wing revolt. He advised that, quote, instead of arousing antagonism as the old-time agitator had to do, now the union leader must be capable of skillful negotiation and of winning over public opinion to support the claims of his organization. In cooperation with the Federal Council of Churches and other religious bodies, he arranged visits to garment shops and union headquarters for groups of clergymen and presented them with an adroit propaganda pamphlet, What the Church Thinks of Labor. Through LID connections and the Public Affairs Committee, which he chaired in 1949, Starr also developed fruitful contacts between the ILGWU and liberal professors throughout the country, but particularly at the Harvard School of Business Administration. Speaking with a lingering trace of a Welsh burr, Starr delivered the English lecture at Harvard on labor education. In August 1949, the Harvard Business Review carried an article by Willard A. Lewis of the ILGWU Legal Department, and in 1952, Starr addressed the Harvard Business School Club. It is interesting to note that in April 1953, Starr's department organized an ILGWU panel discussion where the subject of planning and personal freedom was discussed by such eminent experts as Dr. George Soule of Columbia University and the New Republic, and Dr. J. Kenneth Galbraith and Dr. Seymour E. Harris of Harvard, the latter pair to become controversial figures 7 years later as advisors to the Kennedy administration. In 1951, Clarence Sr., another future Kennedy advisor, addressed a weekend institute at Hudson View Lodge on the Puerto Rican problem. During such sessions, the learned gentlemen both received and imparted instructions as preliminary grooming for the future demands of public life. University and public libraries were generously supplied by Starr with union literature. In one case, a pamphlet giving the union's view on trends and prospects in the garment industry was sent to the economics departments of 650 colleges. Labor attachés of United States embassies abroad, in whose selection union endorsement often played a part, were furnished on request with union-produced pamphlets phonograph records, and propaganda films, and similar assistance was given to occupation forces in Japan and Europe. All, quote, educational material distributed by the Union was based, directly or indirectly, upon the Fabian socialist premise formulated by G.D.H. Cole and promoted by Mark Starr as Dean of American Labor Educators. Namely, that education must build new incentives other than those of private gain. Under the watchful eye of Starr, research and political activities of the ILGWU were vastly expanded. Both departments were headed and staffed by trusted officials of the LID. Throughout that period of mutual growth, the ILGWU's research director was Dr. Lazar Tepper, who had joined SLID at Johns Hopkins and served for years as a director of the adult LID. In 1951 and after, Dr. Tepper lectured at the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, evoking no protest whatever from the Socialist Party or its allies. Political director of the ILGWU under Starr's command was Gus Tyler, a product of SLID at City College of New York. According to an article in the New York Times, it was Tyler who in 1949 introduced political stewards or commissars into Union locals. That same year, he gave a course on politics at the City College of New York, and in 1950 conducted a course in political action at the New School for Social Research. Since 1961, Gus Tyler has been overall educational director of the ILGWU, succeeding Mark Starr, but following loyally in his footsteps. Starr's permanent secretary was the Russian-born Fania M. Cohn, nominally responsible for arranging panel discussions. Veteran member of the LID from the days when it was known as the ISS, she served on the executive committee of the League's New York chapter. Through the combined efforts of such democratic socialists, the ample research facilities of the ILGWU were made available in a more or less guarded fashion to the LID. Thus, from 1935, the ILGWU's research department stood in somewhat the same relation to the LID as the new Fabian Research Bureau did to the British Fabian Society. At Starr's invitation, the redoubtable Margaret Cole herself often flew from London to address union groups and presumably to synchronize research operations with those of the British comrades. Even today, when the widely diffused research activity of the Fabian socialist movement in America is parceled out among various specialized fringe organizations, as well as university centers for advanced study, the research department of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union continues to function as a control center and guiding force in the political labor field. Allegedly, it is acting for the benefit of its members and those of sister unions, domestic and foreign, which it aids. During Mark Starr's prolonged and well-paid term as educational director, the union probably became better known abroad than any other American labor organization. More and more, its New York headquarters were a port of call for labor delegates coming from Germany, Japan, Italy, Korea, and especially from Latin America. Educational assistance and political advice were freely given to budding labor unions all the way from Ireland to New Zealand, from Ghana to Chile and Brazil. In some instances, the freshly organized unions actually preceded the establishment of industries in which they hoped to set labor standards. Nevertheless, they provided bases for political agitation in backward countries seeking to install socialist-oriented governments and in new nations emerging from the Fabian shattered remnants of once flourishing colonial empires. Starr's services to Fabian socialism on a worldwide scale appear to date from 1948, when his opportunities as a member of an official government commission dovetailed neatly with his union duties. That was the same year David Dubinsky, freewheeling president of the ILGWU, helped to launch the International Confederation of Free Trade Unions, the ICFTU. Bloody acronyms. The ICFTU, Labour Adjunct of the Socialist International. In 1949, Dubinsky addressed the Fabian Society in London while attending the first annual meeting of the Confederation. Effective organizer of the Free Trade Union Committee in America was J. Lovestone, international director of the ILGWU. A brilliant, if mercurial character, Lovestone had received his baptism in socialism as student president of the ISS chapter at the City College of New York. Veering leftward, he became a top functionary of the Communist Party, but was expelled for left deviationism. Thereafter, he headed a group of American Marxists who supported the exiled Leon Trotsky and his doctrine of permanent revolution. As such, Lovestone was welcomed back into the Fabian socialist fold and entrusted with far-flung international missions in the name of labour. Together with his assistant and faithful shadow Irving Brown, he has since visited trouble spots in Europe and the Orient on an all-expenses-paid union tours as labour statesman and travelling inspector general. If anyone wonders what possible influence such an international labour body could have on domestic events in the United States, at least one example can be cited. On March the 11th to the 13th, 1963, the Railwaymen's Section Committee of the International Transport Workers' Federation met in Brussels. According to the International Trade Union News of April 1, 1963, issued fortnightly by the ICFTU, quote, "The committee expressed deep concern at the very serious position in which railwaymen of many countries in all parts of the world found themselves, as the result of transport policies directed against the railways or the ruthless rationalization plans of management, or both. These developments were jeopardizing the livelihood of many railwaymen, and in some cases the obstinate attitude of the employers was forcing the railway unions to take militant action." Based on research by the Fabian socialist-controlled International Labour Group, decisions were reached in Brussels identical to those leading to the renewed call for a nationwide railroad strike in America not many weeks later. Just as the Transport and General Workers' Union in Britain has long been the chief bulwark of the London Fabian Society, so the ILGWU and the closely related Amalgamated Clothing Workers' Union have been twin pillars of strength to the LID. From 1935 to 1952, the ILGWU donated $21 million to alleged worthy causes, including political campaigns. From 1951 to 1953 alone, its benefactions exceeded $5 million, of which the greater part was extracted from the pay envelopes of working people and spent at the discretion of union officials. With financial angels of such stature in the offing, it is little wonder that the Fabian socialist movement in America prospered and that its influence grew out of all proportion to the modest size of its directive body, the League for Industrial Democracy. At the present time, the LID enjoys the position of an elder statesman, having delegated many of its more active functions to kindred organizations colonized and steered by certified socialist collaborators, past and present. In its own list of officers and directors for 1963, its own list of officers and directors for 1963 discloses a stable handful of old-timers, plus a number of youthful newcomers, among them children and grandchildren of original members. Fancy that. For the moment, the League appears to be hardly more than an appendage of the Needle Trades Unions, as it once seemed a mere pensioner of the Rand School. Nevertheless, it is still the senior body of Fabian socialism in America, from which future dictates on socialist fashions may be expected to issue. At any desired instant, it can spring to new life again, even though its current status may appear to some to be that of a has-been. Like the Fabian Society of London, the League for Industrial Democracy has always been one of the most underrated socialist leadership groups in the world. The fact is that the LID has been preparing ever since the end of World War II for what seems to be virtual retirement. Its star-studded anniversary meetings of the 1950s were a series of premature swan songs. Already, every one of those successor organizations had been founded and activated that were to adapt Fabian socialism to the grandiose dimensions of the space age. These would transport the United States by fast freeway toward a shimmering goal, which present-day socialists call total democracy, but which earlier undisguised Marxists admitted was worldwide social revolution. Appropriately, the LID conferred its 1963 award for distinguished service upon the aged Upton Sinclair, last surviving member of the group that issued the original call to the ISS in 1905. With his usual happy faculty for letting the radical cat out of the bag, it was Upton Sinclair who on another occasion revealed the tried and true route by which Fabian socialism must travel to power in the United States. Experience had already shown, said he, that it would be done via the two-party system rather than through any third party. Quote, "So I know," announced Sinclair, "that it will be the Democratic Party and not the Socialist Party which will bring this great change to America. It will not be called socialism. Its opponents will insist that it is communism, while its friends will know that it is industrial democracy." That's chapter 16. I feel like that was a really long chapter. Give me a second. I'm just going to take a sip. I might even blow my nose as well because it was really getting itchy there. Excuse me a moment. Okay, we're back. So I just want to quickly check how long that chapter was because I feel like that was one of the longest ones we've read so far. That was By Any Other Name, 228 to 255. So it was like 27 pages. That was quite a chapter. So we might have to slow down and start doing one chapter per video because the next chapter is page 255 up to 297, which is 43 pages. There's no way I'm getting through that today, unfortunately. So I think that's going to be Tuesday's video, and we'll wrap it up there for now. But I think you will agree that this book is proving to be a very good choice, and certainly a fantastic introduction to Fabian socialism and the Fabian society. I'm finding it very powerful to view the current use of the word democracy through this lens, particularly that last quote from Upton Sinclair and the links between and the rebranding of socialism into industrial democracy, although that was planned ahead of time, wasn't it, by Sidney and Beatrice Webb. But this is really good insight into the system we're actually living in, the reality of it, and not just the names and the words that are used to describe it, because I think we probably all feel that we're living in a system that isn't accurately described to us by the people on the news or the politicians in the blue party or the red party, or the talking heads that get the most amount of followers and subscribers and pushed by the algorithms on the different platforms. You know, not many of them are making these points and explaining things and explaining the narrative that we're getting from this book. And there's not a lot of, I don't think there's a lot out there. There's not a lot of resources out there on this book. I don't know. I didn't check actually before we started doing it on this channel. But let's have a look. I'm just typing into YouTube, Rose Martin, Fabian Freeway. Oh, so there's a 5-minute review of it by Pastor Steve Waldron on New Life of Albany channel. And then there's my videos, all 8 of them. Then we've got Thoughts on Thinking. They have a video. I should be sharing this with you, shouldn't I, rather than just describing it to you. That would probably be more helpful. All right, hang on. So we got so if you go for Rose Martin, Fabian Freeway, you got 5 years ago, Pastor Steve Waldron did a video. Then you've got the series that we're doing here, and this one that's live right now. Then you've got, they were planning this all along, Aldous Huxley and the Fabian Society. So that might be a good one, but again, it's only, 11 minutes. The Resistance Podcast, 110. Socialism Part 9. So that's probably, that's the one I would go to looking at these so far. Census Fidelium. It looks like they've got some good B-roll pictures and footage to go along with that as well. Looks like Catholic churches to me. But anyway, that might be a good resource. And then we're on to Tiny Mustache Man. And then we got my conversation here with Nigel Watson, and we're back to my videos again. Oh, here's one. Jason Horsley. He was the author that we actually talked about, wasn't he? I think Jason Horsley. So that would be a good one to look up, because he was born into a Fabian socialist family and has first-hand experience of that ideology, that worldview, and being brought up within it. So he'd be worth checking out. I think that was Jason Horsley, wasn't it? Let's see him. Is he going to come on camera? Yes, it is. That's him. That's the fella. So he's got a book out on this topic. He'd be another one worth looking into. Then it's me again. And then we got some more stuff about book burning. And then we got Matthew Ehret answering a question about what he thinks about Fabian socialism. That's probably a good one. But again, it's only a 5-minute video. Probably a good place to start, though. And then here's a video of somebody saying she's literally a communist. And this is what I mean. There's videos of people out there who actually openly, just unashamedly saying, yes, I am a communist, I'm a socialist. And this woman is on morning television in Britain talking to Piers Morgan. So it's unbelievable, really. Hopefully he's giving her a bit of shit there, because it looks like he is, even though I think he's a wanker. I don't like that guy at all. Then you got Jay Dyer. This is a good video, actually. I watched this one a while ago. This is the Milner-Fabian strategy, and this is his... he's talking about this book, the Milner-Fabian Conspiracy. You can see on the thumbnail there. The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy is the book where I heard about this Fabian Freeway book that we're reading on my channel. So that would be another good one to get into. Nice long form content. He might throw in a few, what do you call it? Impression or two to keep things flowing and entertaining. Looks like he's got his little whiteboard there for his explanations. Jay Dyer is usually good, rock solid on this kind of stuff. So there is a bit of stuff out there on this. Oh, here's another one. Bay Language Institute, Fabian Review. Oh no, that's a person whose name is Fabian rather than. Yeah, so you can see not a massive amount of stuff on here. Back to me again. My channel getting recommended. Fabian Socialist and You by Gary Allen. That's probably a good one. Gary Allen's a bit of a OG. Yeah. So not a massive amount out there, and I think we're definitely touching on some little known topics and information, which is good. And but it's nice to know we're in good esteemed company, such as Jay Dyer, such as Matt Ehret, and such as Jason Horsley as well. So I think that's good. So that's last chapter. What do you think about that? Excuse me. Oh, Rosemary, hello. This will affect even those who support the organization. No wonder people get bumped off. Absolutely. Gwen says, don't listen to all the negativity on Google. LJ says, self-diagnosis is a bit dangerous on Google. Yeah, I would agree with that. I would very much do. If you are going to attempt something like that, I would turn to books. I would turn to this one here. It's a book called What Really Makes You Ill by Dawn Lester and David Parker. And I would also go to this yellow one over here, Gut and Psychology Syndrome by Natasha Campbell McBride. I would start with those two. And kind of regardless of what the symptoms or the effort or the you're experiencing, I think there's a lot of overlap, and you've got to really take a step back and be prepared to unlearn a lot of things and relearn a lot of things, not just kind of go to the highest, most viewed YouTube video and take everything in that as fact, right? That's incredibly risky. Okay, so I think we're not going to do any more reading today. We're going to save that mammoth 43 page chapter for next reading on Tuesday. But we're really seeing this process of permeation. And it's so tricky how they keep changing their names and throwing out a new acronym and targeting young people and targeting maybe students and impressionable people, selling them on visions of utopia and these idealistic views. Don't you want more justice in the world, more fairness, more equality? Well, don't you think that these people who are rich and have all this private control, don't you think it's unfair that they have all that? That's not justice. That's not equality, is it? For those people who are rich to have that, what they've got over there, because you don't have as much. And so don't we need to redistribute it? Don't we need somebody to step in and say, this is not fair, and we're gonna take from this group and we're gonna give it to that group over there? They don't put it in these terms, obviously. They couch it in very deceptive language that is seductive and alluring and sounds very good on paper. But as we learned and heard in that chapter, they're really not. They're not beyond redefining words and playing on people's understanding of words in order to manipulate and deceive. That's a classic tactic. So I think the lesson from today's stream is to always define your terms, always get people when you're disagreeing or arguing or falling out or having a heated discussion, always reset the energy by focusing in on defining the words that you're using, because they might have a completely different definition that they're using, and that's why you're missing each other and you're failing to have a productive and useful conversation, right? What one person means by capitalism, another person might have a totally different meaning. Same with God. One person might be talking about God, another one's talking about God, and you're talking about two different things, even though you're using the same word. Now, particularly, I think what would be useful to use that is in reference to the word democracy. What is democracy? The best system that's ever invented. We're so lucky to be alive during a time where we have democracy. All right, but what is the definition of the word? What does it mean? Where does it come from? What's its history? How did we get to this point? Are things really all that good? Are they working out really well for everyone around us? Are most people who we know and love and care about getting more freedom and happiness and love and joy and health and time in their lives, all these things that are actually important? Or are things getting more expensive, opportunities getting less, the health getting worse? What's the actual trajectory that we're witnessing around us in the lives, our own lives and the lives of people we care about? And therefore let's look critically at the systems we have been born into and really nail down what they actually are, who they are serving, who they were designed by, and whether or not this label of democracy is what we have all been led to believe and assume it is, right? Because as we all know, to assume makes an ass of you and me. And on that classic dad joke point, I'm going to leave it there. So enjoy the rest of your sunny, blessed Sunday if you're in a place with sun. If you are not, then I hope you get some sun soon. Enjoy some nature. Enjoy time with yourself. Sometimes people need to get a bit of time to themselves to reset and recuperate, recharge their batteries. But if you're more of a social butterfly, then hope you get to spend some time with your loved ones, doing things you love, and take care of yourselves and each other. Usual message from me. We're going to come back on Tuesday night. We've got a massive chapter to get through, so I'm going to make sure that we have full focus and attention and full energy ready for that. And I'll see you then. So that's all from me. So take care and God bless.